All right. And welcome back, you guys, to the Self Selecting Podcast. I am your host, Corey Hageman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. Uh, Today, we are talking about, obviously, if you already know this because you clicked on the video, you saw the title, you're like, this one is for me. How to shrink your waist, how to lose the belly fat, how to bring your waistline in, how to make it tighter, how to create that hourglass shape. I'm sure all of that. It's an extremely long title. YouTube made an exception this time, apparently. That's what we're getting into today. But before we do, I just want to say, uh, I went in, got a Dexa this morning, at the time of recording, which I know this is like production, bad etiquette to be like, oh, like this is recorded in advance. But let me tell you, like for the majority of the time the podcast has been around, I have been extremely well fed. I have been at body fat levels that support cognitive function. And the leaner I get, dumber I feel, the less cognitive reserve I have on hand. And I went and got my DEXA this morning. And the time of recording this is like June. So I mean, like, honestly, whenever this comes out, we'll have seen if I have actually competed. To be quite honest, I've talked about this on Patreon a handful of times. There is some travel I have coming up in August that's gonna be very difficult to maintain, uh, stage lean, but even realistically, I think, like, I'll just be honest, I'm not probably going to, be super restrictive, and because of that, I want to set myself up for success, and, just where I'm at, honestly, it makes it kinda difficult, it makes it, hard. In the past, I've always had the luxury to have plenty of time, and I think this diet particularly, like, I've come down quite a bit, and I still have a bit to go, um, but even, I don't know, zooming out or zooming in, however you wanna look at it, there is a part of me that's very much like, I want to feel confident about how I get on stage, and right now, being self-coached, that is not, very confidence inspiring. It definitely that is probably the bulk of the work that you do in your self-coaching. Even if you know what to do, you deal with a lot of self-doubt. And I mean, like, Jordan's probably the only one who can speak to the degree that, like, seeing, actually witnessing the magnitude, in which I experience it. Um, because frankly, it's just like I look at the other competitors, I look at myself, and it's hard to keep an objective eye. So that's why I rely so heavily on like objective metrics and like the Dex is like a nice little add-on this time. Like I'm not really doing it with, I don't know, the idea that it's going to guide decision making. It's more so just another data point. And realistically, I don't know, I was kind of hoping for a little bit of an ego stroke. Didn't get that. It's just point aside. Um, with where I'm at right now, especially this past week, I took a diet break and I'm like, okay, I I don't know if I don't know if I wanna get on stage. Yeah, in theory, I don't know, simple terms, like, of course, yeah, I wanna compete. I wanna see the muscle that I've built. But there is a part of me, and I think this is very normal, and that's why I share it with you guys. There's a part of me that almost romanticizes, like, hey, like, you've lost a ton of weight. You feel like ultra shredded. Like, I mean, at like 135, like I feel very much in clothes in a bikini. I'm like, I feel fucking great. Like, this is a great look for the summer, and I'm happy with it. Um, and I think sometimes that like appreciation, I don't know, and that the feeling of success, like, hey, like, you've done something awesome, and something that I should be proud of, that gets overshadowed by the idea of like, yeah, but like, how do you place on stage? And it's sad. It's really sad, when I like take myself out of my body or when I think about it like from even like a coach's perspective with athletes who have like accomplished so much, and really made big improvements in their physique. And yet, because they didn't get the placing that they want, which, spoiler, everyone wants to win. Some people are a little more like, hey, I would be happy with the top five, or I'd be happy with first call outs, or I'd be happy if I just looked better. But largely, everyone wants to win. And statistically, realistically, there's one winner. There's a whole lot of losers on show day, by definition. And it it's a shame. I it's it's just it's really disappointing. I think with age, I did turn 30 years old last month. I like I've come to find I'm like I knew, and I've said this for a while, is that like my identity is removed from how I do on stage, especially with the organization I compete in. And it's like I'm not going to do whatever it takes to win. Actually, on the contrary, I'm very very hesitant, even in this case, to like put in something like Anavar. Like, and I can't tell you how like weird that feels, like being in the position that I'm in, talking about the shit that I talk about online, and then also being like, "Oh, yeah, I don't know if I actually am 100% on board with this at this point. I don't know if I wanna do it." Not that I don't know how to do it, not that I don't trust the sourcing, but there is a part of me that's like, "Do do I need to do this? Is this, like, a decision I really wanna stand by?" Um, and I can say that, like, yeah, through a lot of introspection, like, I don't know, like, at this time of this video coming out, maybe I'll have competed. I mean, like, the goal very much is to, like, as of right now, the goal is continue to lose weight this week, and I'm still following the timeline, and I have my shows picked out, and I have my posing sessions with Phoebe all planned. Um but just wanted to share that because, that is sitting so heavy on me, and, I've talked about it on tier 3, but realistically, um, I think a lot of people in this sport, they struggle with this idea that, like, "Well, I already committed to doing a show. I can't pull out." Like, there's no like, people think, and, like, "What does this say about me?" And I can say, like, I have forced shows time and time again. Many of the shows that I've done, I have not been ready in time, or I've not been 100%. I've been injured, and because of that, I've gotten on stage, I've competed, and I've still done objectively well, but it's not the most important thing. That is something that, like, is really hard for me to ignore, is those feelings of getting off stage when I've not been 100%, or even mentally, I've just not been 100% in it, and the feeling I've had afterwards, and I'm like, "Why why did you know, clutch on to this sunk cost fallacy so hard that at no point, like, you really tuned into, like, what you were feeling?" So, I don't know. Maybe I'll compete, maybe I'll have competed. Uh, if I did compete, hopefully I did well. I hope I looked amazing. I hope my posing looked incredible because I've got my second session with Phoebe Hagen, which, if you're not familiar with her, she is an Olympian level bikini pro. She also owns the Posing Portal. She offers a like top tier posing service. I did a session with her week ago. Yeah, a week ago at this point, and it was so nice. It was just so nice to be able to delegate the decision making off to someone else for fucking once. In this, well, I shouldn't say in this prep or in any preps, because I've had mentors, I've had coaches, but it felt really good to be a dumb athlete, to not have to like overthink and make decisions. And I mean that can be, it can be helpful in some regards. It can also be a detriment if you put that trust into the wrong person. So, very, very happy with how that session went. I feel like I learned a lot from her. I got another session coming up, so excited to continue working on my craft, my presentation. So, uh, now that all that is out of the way, we were talking about how to shrink your waist, and the reason that we were talking about this, um, I mean, like largely I watched Junior USA's this past weekend, um, and, there were some really teeny tiny waist, that I saw, mostly when it comes to the bikini competitor, the wellness competitor. like having a specific waist size, it's not nearly as important as the look that you display, like relative to your waist to the rest of your body. Like there's context that matters because you can have a very small waist, but in the case that you don't have the right visibility or it's not in the right proportion to the rest of your body, it can kind of fall short. And that's where like I kind of got the inspo yesterday, honestly. Wasn't even going to record today, but then I looked at the calendar. I'm like, well, if I'm going to compete, I need to have all my shit backlogged. And then if I'm going to be traveling all August, then I need to have that shit backlogged. So I'm like, okay, we are getting on top of it. A few recording days in June, and then I will be a whole quarter ahead, just about. So I was thinking about this and I'm like, okay, like regardless, competitor, non competitor, there's a lot of individuals who I speak with on a regular basis, and a big fixation is I want to bring my waist in. That's why you're watching this video. That's why you've hopefully sat through this 11-minute recap debrief that you didn't ask for that I usually don't do. But it's like Liz Brody said this past week, which I'm actually going to record with her next week. Excited for that. She's like, I love when people get into that stage of prep where they just like, they just become more and more reckless, like, on social media and what they say, and, like, the filter comes off and, like, they just start really speaking their mind, and I definitely feel that, with recording, but, like, I felt that with a few times the last few episodes I've done, but, even just, like, the patience the patience is just I'm losing it really quickly, so, um all this to say, a common theme I see across most people that reach out, men and women, competitor, non competitor, is that they do have this fixation on bringing their waistline in, losing body fat around their waist, creating a just like a different type of shape. That really the waist is the centerpiece. And I, to be completely redundant, that's exactly why you're watching this. And as I was like formulating my thoughts around this topic. I was like, it's really easy to just talk about waist trainers, but we're not really going to do that here. I wanted to be expansive and exhaustive because I think that in reality, it can just be like, oh, yeah, you want to lose some body fat? Cool. Like that'll bring your waist in. Like we should bring body fat down everywhere. Sure. But that's not going to cover a 45 to 60-minute video. And realistically, what I find is that when someone has a goal like this, like I want to bring my waist in, I want to shrink my waist, I want a smaller, tighter waist, whatever it is, as a coach, there is a lot of value in understanding exactly why and like what they also mean by bringing their waistline in. So that's where I think when someone says like I wanna lose the belly, lose the pooch, however, like people are so degrading when they talk about their waist, myself included. um, I think it's important to define what you actually mean by that. Do you want a flatter waist? Like, is there actually like bloat or distension? I'm gonna say like heavy air quotes because some people just like they drink water and they're like, oh, I'm bloated. I think the term bloat is like so overused. And like it's like also it's not very fair to people who actually have like gut issues where they truly like I've had so many people come to me recently who are like, hey, do you think this is SIBO? And like truly throughout the day they look like they went through a pregnancy. Like it is bad. It is serious distress. That is bloating. And it's not to minimize. Some people can have varying degrees of bloat, but if we're specifically talking about, like distension or even just like waist circumference, I think that needs to be clear as opposed to, something physical. So, like, truly, like, not having good core control, feeling like, hey, like, even when you stand and, like, you suck in, you can't really hold that position for that long, which is not something I think you should do. I don't think you should just be at attention, just, like, having your waist, like, held in. I think that's, like, very neurotic and in few cases is, like, ever really warranted. And, like, if truly when I think about, like, the instances where I would say, like, "Oh, that's something we need to work on," is exclusively to stage. And it's not even just like that in, like, totality, it's like you need to have lower body fat, you need to have a smaller circumference, you need to have, good ratios relative to your waist, but then you also need to have good waist control because you're going to be standing there and you're judged on that size. Now, past waist control, past a flatter waist, like, reducing actual like rounding out of the abdomen, that, truly that could be hormonally driven, that could be gastrointestinally driven. Um, I mean, like, systemically, there could be a medical issue. That's what I'm trying to say is, like, if you're actually experiencing bloat to the extent that it's something like there is a catalyst that's causing discomfort to the point that, like, you are, like, your waist is distending, that isn't normal. Like, that's not something that you should just be like, oh, that's how I am. Like, I say that, like, I say that with love, knowing or hoping that you take that as like, hey, like, um, you shouldn't live that way. Like, you should go get medical help and have a professional work with you on like that. That's not something that I would say is like indicative of a healthy individual. And it's very much something you should not ignore. And like just on the topic of like GI stuff, because also it's been a weird few months. I've had a client with a bowel obstruction. I've had consults with individuals who have had serious GI issues, who've had blood in their stool. And I think people downplay really the severity and the consequences that are associated with GI issues. Like in both of these cases, like if we're talking about a GI bleed or like an actual obstruction, if you don't take care of that, like, things can go south really quickly. Like, your actual intestines can begin to die. That tissue can necrotize. I think, yeah. And realistically, there's very limited options once that happens. So that's not something please, if you have blood in your stool, like, if they try to put you off for like a colonoscopy or like an assessment for like a month, why? Say that you're really concerned, because if you're not really concerned, you fucking should be. So, okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox on this, get back to the point in this video. It's just obviously, as you can tell, that's something that's very like it blows my mind. And like even my client with the bowel obstruction, I'm like, we can't ignore, like, we can't like treat this like, oh, it's a little, it's just a little thing. Like, we have to consider this is a medical emergency. Okay. So, um, aside from that, like even like hormonally driven, bloating, distension, like I would say, like, yes, that's something that we need to address. It's not as emergent typically, in the way that like someone who has an obstruction or has a GI bleed, like we need to actually take care of that. Getting so far off the point, gosh, this is gonna be rough. But past that, past an actual like medical issue, um, there's also the question of like, hey, like, are you happy with your waist size? Is your waist size actually like okay, but it's your waist size relative to the rest of your structure, your shoulders, your hips? And is it more so like just like a shape that you want to project, like that you want to carry, at different body fat levels? And like right now, you're finding that your shape itself is very like rectangular, like very board like, and you want to build some curves, because again, that is different than just wanting a flatter waist. That is even more specific. That's different than wanting to correct bloat. And then the really like the what am I at? The third or fourth tier of this is like, are you happy with your hips, your shoulders, like your waist size, you're happy with it, but like you want more definition, you want more tone. So realistically, like the answer there is like you want to lose fat, um, but you want you want something that isn't currently there, meaning you either want some visibility of your abdomen, you want the skin to be tighter, you want it to be smoother, you want the integrity of the skin to just appear better. Some people want abs, some people do not. Like, so I was telling Jordan about this. I'm like, no, I beat this one to death, but not for nothing. Like, I think it's important, especially in a client assessment, to get a really good sense of like what it is that someone actually is looking for. Um, because I can tell you, like, I had like a midline through my abs at a 145, not really at 152, but like 145, like some people were like, yeah, like, I don't know why you'd want to get harder than that or get more definition. And on the other end of the spectrum where I'm at now, some people have made comments like, like, I can't wait to see your full six pack. And it's like, it goes to show it's really easy for me to use examples of myself. And that's like really the sandbox in which I feel most comfortable in, rather than using others. But like, it goes to show that there is a big discrepancy in what people like and what people are looking for in these, like, abstract, goals that we're chasing. So in the case that someone does want, like, a tighter stomach, a tighter waistline, it's like, it's kind of important to define what that actually is. Do you want abs? Do you want just that midline, like, that, like, split in between your waist? Do you want a six pack? Do you want your obliques carved out? Do you want, like, serratus gills, or do you not want that? Like, would that actually be too lean? And relative to your shape, like, depending on where you store body fat, like, are you okay with losing some of the curves or even getting, like, really vascular or really defined in other parts of your body, in the pursuit of your abs or of that definition at the waistline? And this all, like, like, it comes back to really, with anything, we need to know the problem at hand, in order to know how we're going to solve it. Like, you can say that, like, you want to shrink your waist. You can come to me and be like, hey, I want to lose the belly fat. And I can be like, cool, like, we're just going to go towards that goal aimlessly. And for the record, like, some people might not know. They might be like, I've never had even like that midline in my abs. So let's see like what it takes to get there. And that's where I think, like, I had a consult this week where the client, now client, ooh, excited for that. She was like, how do you coach people whose goals are a little less concrete? Like, I don't want to get on stage, and it's not even necessarily that I want to lose a certain amount of weight. It's more so I want to feel more confident in my body. I want to feel more in control. And like, I have an understanding of like, just like generally how to manipulate my body. And I thought it was such a refreshing question because I mean, like, I truly feel this, like, genuinely. I'm like, um, there is a return that in her case, I'm like, you get a certain return based on the efforts that you put forth. And we essentially need to establish, like, okay, is that return fair to you? Like, are you happy with the amount of effort that you're putting forth for the return in terms of like physique changes? Are you happy with the amount of time it takes? Are you happy with like the actual results themselves? Are they good enough for the sacrifices that you make? And if they're not, then we need to recalibrate either expectations on what the return's going to be or expectations on what the effort is that's required to get said goal. But I think it's like a good way to kind of approach someone who isn't like super concrete about like, hey, I want to lose 5 pounds or I want to do my first competition. I think just even figuring out like, okay, like, are you satisfied with the efforts that you're putting forth? Or do you feel like you should actually be getting more of a return because your efforts feel really strenuous and it feels like a pretty heavy lift, metaphorically. So really in this like deep dive that I've done into the topic of like bringing your waistline in, shrinking your waist, improving the appearance of your waist, there's really four solutions that should cover you across all of the potential problems that we've discussed thus far. Maybe I'm forgetting one, and if there is one or there's something that I haven't covered, I mean, please leave it in the comments below. But number one, if your goal is more definition or just really like a flatter appearance, body fat reduction is priority number one. Now, the waist appearance, like, I'm talking if when you look at your waist and you find that like there is pinchable fat that you don't like you don't actually like the tone of your stomach itself, then the answer is quite simple. We just need you to lose fat. And depending on where you store fat, this could mean a couple of different things. It could be quite different investments depending on if you're someone who stores fat at your waistline. If you store fat only in your hips and maybe your waistline, you don't carry a lot of fat on your stomach or on your lower back, on the love handles area. Now, we'll say this is something that specifically with individuals who are experiencing some kind of hormonal imbalance, you can find that especially in states of very chronic stress, sorry, very elevated stress, for, I don't know, an extended period of time, even if you're doing everything right and you're in a very modest surplus, and you're intentionally trying to accumulate fat, like in the case like post show or post fat loss phase, that fat can very much come on your waistline, and that's something that like we need to be cognizant of, especially if we're going through builds, or if, again, in the case we're coming out of like a post show period. Fat gain around the midsection for biological females, I mean, that would largely track with there being, low estrogen, and largely just like heightened elevated states of stress, so high cortisol, insulin resistance, even low growth hormone production, low testosterone. That one less compared to estrogen, but estrogen specifically, when we see those levels very, very low. So in the case of anovulation, in the case of menopause, we do see that fat accumulation, does tend, or I guess the deposition of fat does tend to favor more the midsection and visceral fat gain. So, when we kind of work backwards from this, if you're just someone who naturally that's where you store that fat, then that might mean that you have to get quite lean in order to see, the circumference, like the actual size of the waist that you want to have. And like, there isn't a waist size, like, for bikini or for, like, I don't know, a body fat percentage that I can be like, "Oh, hey, like, if your waist is 25 inches, like, that means you're gonna be ripped, or that means you're gonna do really well on a pro stage." But I will say, like, within the sport of bodybuilding, a lot of the waist circumferences that I see, for individuals who are at the highest level, I mean, like, they truly are, like, 22, 23 inches, sometimes even under 22. They're very, very tiny. There are some 24 inches, but like we're gonna get into how that's, a little more plausible and acceptable. It's not to say it's a hard and fast rule, and I can already hear there's gonna be people that be like, "Well, my waist was this, and I placed well," or "I know so and so." It's like I have to do my fucking best, okay? So just give me a break. But when it comes to actual body fat percentages, it kind of comes down, like waist circumference relative to body fat percentage, kind of comes down to the P ratio, specifically at your trunk. So the fat to muscle ratio, if you're someone who does not have very good abdominal muscles, or very not good, just developed abdominal muscles, this can be something that, you find is like generally maybe your waist size is very small, and the circumference of it in itself is not very big. Yet the appearance and the look is not, up to your standards. And that's like ultimately what this comes down to is like, in the case that you want a tighter stomach, you kind of have to be specific, like how lean do you want your stomach to actually be? And realistically, what are the obstacles that come down to even losing fat, in the case that, like, let's say you already have like good abdominal muscles? I can tell you, like, one oblique is much more developed than the other oblique. My left side, that's where I pose. In like on stage and stuff, I don't show my right side for the longest time. Like I'm talking like my first several years into bodybuilding, I would do this sounds so dumb. I would do so many like selfies, and I was always like in the gym like posing on my right side. And I developed like a thicker oblique, more muscle density on that side, I swear to God, just through like isometric holds. Just because I had thought it looked really good. And I'm sure, like, I mean, like, even before I started competing, I probably just favored that side more, and I wasn't being as cognizant as like, um, as I am now, obviously, with like symmetry left to right. But that is something that, like, I find I'm like, okay, on the side that has more muscle, that like my definition of my abs is, um, it's a little bit more developed. That visibility comes just a hair easier. So it's like, if you're someone who has like pretty developed, abdominal muscles, you might not have to get as lean, and your body fat might be able to sit a little bit higher with still some good visibility. But then you have to really ask, okay, like, are you okay with the circumference? Does the circumference have any bearing on like your satisfaction with your waist? Now, I kind of already went into the visceral fat gain. I mean, that's something, let's say, in the case that like you came out of your fat loss phase or your post show phase, or maybe you went through menopause and you're at a point now where, like, okay, you want to lose body fat, and maybe the body fat was distributed, like the way it came on was very much viscerally and not peripherally, like not on your extremities. In that case, like it again, it might mean that, like, especially if you're going directly into another fat loss phase with that same hormonal profile, you just might have more technically like stubborn fat that you kind of have to work through. And by work through, I just mean like be patient that it's going to come off. Realistically, like you're not going to totally be able to spot reduce, and I would say, like, a lot of people, they kinda waste their time with that, um, but if that's something that, like, you know has been an issue in the past, or like, hey, you're approaching the biological age in which, like, this is going to be something you're prone to because of low estrogen, or in the case of biological men, because of low testosterone, 'cause that can also lend to more visceral fat gain, then it's something I would safeguard, very, like I would be very strict and, like, deliberate about that gaining period and making sure that your hormones are in a position where, like, if you're going to gain fat, even minimal amount of fat, that it's not going to come on in a place that's, going to move you further away from the kinda, like, waistline that you want to have, or the kind of physique and the shape that you wanna have. So, with this, if, like, body fat reduction at the waist, if that is resonating with you and you're like, "Okay, like, I would feel much more confident just reducing body fat," amazing. What you're gonna do, you're gonna put yourself in a deficit, you're gonna be patient, you're gonna listen to all my videos around, like, what you need to do to be successful in, the correct target rate of change per day and per week that you need to aim for. But in terms of actually tracking that fat loss, specifically around the waist, you're gonna use a measuring tape. So you're gonna measure, it doesn't matter, at the narrowest or the widest point, whatever feels best for you. I do both because I'm a competitor and, like, realistically I kind of want to know both. It doesn't honestly matter, just make sure it's consistent if you're comparing trends week to week. So don't do the narrowest and then the next week do the widest. Like, I personally, I will do the narrowest and the widest, and I will just, like, look at those trends side by side, but it's not that big a deal. Do that every week the same way. Um, I would encourage you, especially if fat loss, fat reduction at the waistline is an identified goal and a priority for you, I would use at-home calipers. You don't need to pay a trainer to do this. I like the analog ones that are just, like, spring-loaded. Like, it's literally like a $20 tool from Amazon. It's not one that, like, takes a lot of skill, but, like, realistically, pinch if you look at your belly button, pinch at the upper quadrant on one side, so the left or the right side. Make sure to do the same side each and every week. Um, Same thing with either the oblique or the lower back. Like, for me, I do the upper right quadrant. And then on the lower back, I have a birthmark or like a little mole that I know I'm like, okay, like I put it right here and I pinch as much as I can. And it's um just behind, like, my actual oblique line. So, like, I don't necessarily do it in the mirror because I have a lot of practice doing it, but realistically, that's how I track that pinchable fat, and I just look at it in millimeters. I'm not looking at actual body fat percentages. I'm just saying, I'm like, "Okay, in terms of pinchable fat, what came off this week?" Um, if you want to go out of your way and do DEXAs as well, I think that's a great tool. If you specifically, if you're like, hey, I think the fat came on viscerally, I think there's an aspect to this that's, which I guess I should have prefaced with this to begin with, is like visceral fat is fat stored in and around your organs. Like, maybe not in, but like in between your organs. So it's not going to be subcutaneous. It's not going to maybe be as visual, but it can definitely add, what I'll just call distension to your waistline. And that's something with the DEXA we can actually, like, track and measure. And I don't think for a lot of people it's 100% necessary, but especially if you're going through compositional shifts that you're not used to, or you're finding you're like, my weight's going up, but my legs and my arms are staying relatively lean. It's just a lot of it's like happening at the waistline. That could be worth doing, and getting like a really precise, like visceral to subcutaneous fat store ratio. And then you can kind of track that over several months, or even like once a month if you want to do it that way. In short, though, if you want more definition, if you want more visibility, it would make the most sense to just lose body fat, and see kind of where your circumference, and even like your shape, your like relative shape from your shoulders, and your hips to your waist shakes out to before you actually start like, I don't know, assigning other goals. Now, what about in the case that you've gotten really lean? Maybe you've gotten to the end of a fat loss phase or end of like a contest prep, and you're like, okay, like I have muscle and my waist isn't like ridiculously big or wide, but generally the shape that I have, even when I'm like posing and like really sitting into my glutes or like really like flexing, like it's not as, um, it's not as freaky, it's not as X frame or S frame, however you want to call it. And I almost think about it that like this way, I think about it just like ratios is like, okay, your clavicles to your waist, and it's really your clavicles to your rib cage to your pelvis. It's like truly bone structure. That is going to be what like I refer to as like someone's natural frame. That matters actually quite a bit. I can tell you like I have pretty like wide clavicles. So, and I have pretty big traps too, which is why I'm always like putting my hair here. Um, that makes it where I don't necessarily need as much muscle in my upper body. But with that, having a smaller rib cage, like my actual rib cage shape is not very broad. It's quite narrow. And because I have not necessarily a shorter torso, but there's not, Phoebe finally she finally clarified this. She's like, "You don't really have a short torso." But she's like, The space in between your ribs and your pelvis is very short, like that portion, which is actually an important distinction, which I'm not gonna get too much into now, but small ribs as opposed to a wider rib cage, that will improve that taper. And then when you look at like pelvic width, this is where like having a wider pelvic bones, like your ilium, like that can actually give you better ratios naturally. Now it's important if we're talking about someone with wide hips, um, who's competing, let's say, and like, I mean, I know Allison, like Testu, y'all really loved that episode I did with her. And we talked like in and about, like we completely broke down her physique. And one of the things that she was talking about how she struggled with, in producing the look that's now qualified her for the Olympia is like balancing out her wide hips relative to her glute meats. And I know that's something she even said. She's like, I have to work on that, like going into the Olympia because my hips are wider. You don't get almost like, I want to call it muffin top of the glute med. You don't get that like very pretty like heart shaped. Whereas if someone's hips are more narrow, even adding a little bit of muscle will create that curvature, and not necessarily in a boxy way, but it'll give you more roundness and shape. And we see the same thing with like tie-ins is like if you have very short tie-ins, you don't necessarily need as much tissue per square inch as opposed to if you have very long tie-ins, to get that same kind of projection, especially in the front pose, you're going to need more depth and density. So it's actually more muscle in the long run. So these are all the things that like go into creating, especially for stage, creating that balanced physique and creating a lot of depth and projection. But when we're talking about just like generally walking around day to day, I can say, like, for someone who is looking to improve the shape of their waist to make it a little more X frame, a little more hourglass, it doesn't necessarily mean you just have to shrink your waist or bring your waist in dramatically. I mean, like, yes, if you have body fat to lose, that will help. But I can say, like, I've had a fairly small waist most of my life, and even at heavier weights, even when it's only 24, 25 inches, having more muscle up top and down low, that has helped so much in the improvement in the actual shape itself. And for the upper body, this comes down to developing your shoulders and your lats to really widen your frame. And especially from the back, we have to consider like your rear delts, your teres major, teres minor, but your lats themselves, like they can really help accentuate your waistline, and make you kind of look like an upside down triangle, which I think is a very aesthetic look. And if you're going for like the full hourglass, if you want like that lower body taper as well, this is going to come down to your glute max, your glute med, and I would even say your legs a little bit too. And this is something like I have been very reserved on. Um, really speaking about publicly, but like as I get leaner, I've seen like my legs have come up from last season, and I have little stick legs anyway. I just carry a lot of fat there, so it's very deceiving, especially in the off season. But like seeing that there's more muscularity on my legs, specifically like my upper quads, I'm like, okay, cool. This actually adds like really good curves to my frame, for my pelvic width, like the diameter of my pelvis. So I mean, like it's something I know in bikini. It's like, you know, a cardinal sin to be like, you should grow your quads. But realistically, I think there are a lot of competitors, especially now, who are actually being told, like, your quads, it's not that you need more detail, but you need more taper. And like realistically, if you don't have that density in the lower body, even like right underneath the glute, it's not as mature of a physique. It's not as dense as we want. And I promise this isn't to say like, oh, bikini's moving to like quad dominant. Like, no, that's all wellness all day. But realistically, I do think there's some degree of lower body development as a minimum that you need to have, that a lot of people in recent shows have like been very public about. Like, yeah, like I need more glutes, but I was actually told also like I need a little bit more quad, a little bit more hamstring. Now, in the case that you have been avoiding direct shoulder work or lat work or quad work, or even glute work, which I don't think many of y'all are avoiding that. I think most women I speak with have just a high degree of glute volume in their training, like, by proxy. And um, if there are muscle groups that you're avoiding, I would just be very clear on like why you're avoiding them. I'll say, like, I don't want to have more biceps or triceps because of how developed my upper body already looks, with my rhomboids and my traps being a little bit bigger, my delts being bigger, having wider clavicles. I know that like if I put more tissue on my biceps, it's only going to mean that like to have that taper of the delts, that like my delts will have to get bigger, which I don't necessarily want. And I think that's something just to be cognizant of, is like as you're building out your upper body and your lower body, like what is the actual look that you want? Do you want lower quads? Do you want really thick and like meaty hamstrings? Of course, everyone seems to want like an hourglass shape, so that's going to be glutes and delts, and then like bringing your waist in. But really, like the best strategy I think to go about that is just to focus on getting really fucking strong in specific movements, and then having a method to consistently track that strength increase. Yes, like hypertrophy, like that can be accomplished through several different ways. But for me, I think the most efficient way is honestly like having some strength goals in mind, spending an adequate amount of time ironing out any instabilities at the shoulder, at the hips, at the pelvis, so that that doesn't become a bottleneck that catches up with you. Because I think for a lot of people, that is kind of their like gateway to like, oh, I can't continue to build. When in reality, it's like this is an issue with function, not necessarily that you've maxed out your natural potential. Bottom line, building more muscle can actually help and can accentuate and create the illusion of a smaller waist. So that would be something that I would recommend doing if, like, just reducing body fat in itself is not enough to get the look that you're aiming for. So measuring that hypertrophy, measuring that progress, I would use a tape measure. I would measure the areas that you want to grow and the areas that you don't want to grow, especially if we're talking about someone who is knowingly going to be putting on body fat, which is very, very normal and expected in a build. Um, Monitor those strength progressions, be on the lookout for any kind of indication that you are now compensating for poor function. And if that's something that like you're equipped to do yourself to manage and iron out, great, do it yourself. If you're not, hire a coach, hire me to help do that. Hire me for a one-time consult. Like, I mean, literally the amount of people that sign up for literally, like, they're just like, I want to speak with you for 60 minutes about my training. I want you to write a training program for me that I can then run myself. Like, that is so gratifying and rewarding. And it doesn't like, I don't have to be involved in like all of your programming, but I think that's one that like a lot of people sleep on, and they don't realize how much more they can get out of their physiques if their training is being closely managed. And of course, if you have it within your budget and you see the value in it, getting a DEXA, I mean, like, you do have to be careful because lean muscle mass and like how DEXs actually read lean mass as opposed to fat mass, that can vary pretty heavily. So we just need to be cognizant that you're not like me and you get a DEX and it says you lost muscle and then you get like really down, you start having a pity party. And I say that jokingly, but at the same time, like it is a very real thing. And I work with clients all the time who like as they're going through fat loss phases, they'll see those fluctuations in lean mass because it's actually accounting for other like aspects of fluctuations, whether that be water retention, GI weight, inflammation, and they're not really able to piece together like why there was such a vast fluctuation in one read versus the other. So if you're not familiar with like how to distinctively like parse out what fluctuations are normal, which ones actually might be indicating you're losing muscle, I would specifically in that case, I would work with an expert. Or hire someone to help you kind of make sense of that. Now, I'm not going to tell you, like, hey, here's what you need to do if you have SIBO, if you have H. pylori, if you have candida, if you have chronic UTIs or BV or any kind of infectious disease. Like, I'm not going to say, like, here's a framework in which you follow. But in the case that you are having very transient yet consistent bloating, GI distress, infections, um, autoimmune type disorders, you should absolutely work with a specialist. And I mean this like, yes, related to your stomach and like distension. If that's something that you're like, I just get bloated after every single meal, or I get really bad gas, or I have diarrhea, or I have constipation, or I have rashes, or whatever it might be. Like, I can say that, like, I've had my own instances of autoimmune disorders that were extremely disruptive and discouraging and made it nearly impossible to pursue my fitness goals, my health goals. And I worked with just every type of doctor you can imagine, an endocrinologist, an OB, an infectious disease specialist, an allergist, and across the board, I was like, hey, like, I need assistance. Like, I need direction into figuring out, like, what could be causing symptoms I was having, and realistically, like, what's a prognosis. And it wasn't until I saw a dermatologist who maybe wasn't as versed in the autoimmune disorder itself, but was able to prescribe and also willing to advocate and prescribe, that I was able to get on medication that helped manage those symptoms. And that's where I have a lot of individuals who come to me who are like, hey, I'm working with a functional specialist, I'm working with a naturopath. And it's not to say like those aren't good options, but especially in the case where you have insurance, especially in the case where you are desperate, frankly, for answers, I wouldn't entirely shy away from going maybe the public route and going to like medical professionals, not just someone who's operating out of their own practice. And the reason being, like, it just comes down to like, just like with HRT clinics, just like wellness clinics, there are a lot of functional specialists and people who are practicing, yes, outside of their scope, who are willing to put you on gut protocols that might not be appropriate for you, or require you to get tons of labs done that realistically, like, they are getting kickbacks from, but then also like don't actually get you closer to a diagnosis or even a good prognosis. And I would say, like, especially in the case of chronic bloating, IBS, digestive issues, go to a GI specialist. It's not to say that that's going to be, the end all be all, but like get their opinion, get their input. In the case that it's hormonal, an endocrinologist, for males, even a urologist, you might have an easier time getting insurance to cover it if it's urology, which is something I didn't know until, looking deeper into that for different clients, is that endocrinologist, reproductive specialist, oftentimes insurance is going to consider that a separate, a non-critical, non-essential specialist that you're seeing. So they could very well charge you, depending on your insurance, a $200 to $300 copay, or they might not even cover it. Whereas a urologist, that's more so like a male OB, not just male, but through my personal experience as well as helping both family members as well as clients, that's been an aspect that we've kind of had to figure out, like, hey, how can we get care, or how can this client get care while still like being economically responsible and getting the right type of help. Obviously, in OB, if you're dealing with anything female, like reproductively that you're concerned about, and I would even say like hormonally, or even like if you're dealing with recurrent or chronic infections, which that's something that like I've been to OBs who are very good about advocating for my needs and even like the types of birth control that I would prefer. And then I've been to other ones who are just very demeaning and like are not very open-minded to um HRT, to non-hormonal forms of birth control. So it's not to say that whoever you go to is going to be able to actually help you, but I wouldn't rule it out, especially if you're kind of jaded by the medical system, as you can probably tell I am. But in the case that you're dealing with any kind of bacterial overgrowth or chronic infections, this can be digestive, that like maybe your GI specialist wasn't able to help you. I would even consider going to an infectious disease specialist. I met with one who like, I kind of explained my history, and I was like, "I am at a loss because I've been to 4 other types of doctors, and I haven't really gotten any answers or seen any kind of improvement." And they were really the first one, alongside the OB, to really advocate for me and give me a different perspective. So, that could be something that you also explore. And then even, to the extent that we're looking at, like, a food allergy, which, like, just so we're clear, it's like you can be allergic to different types of foods that are upsetting your GI tract and like causing symptoms literally upon ingesting said food and not need to go to the emergency room. So this part of my health journey was going to see an allergist. I'm like, I think I just want to know if like maybe I am gluten intolerant, maybe I'm celiac. This was kind of because I couldn't piece together the symptoms I was having. And she did not only a food test, she did an environmental test. I think it was the derm who did a true patch test, which was also insightful. So to like even like acrylics, like nails, or different types of chemicals and additives within like many products that many of us use. But like getting a full like allergy testing done, I think can be helpful. But like what I found through the allergist was like in my own instance, I'm like, I'm allergic to bananas, avocados, grapes, and cashews, and those are all things like I was having pretty much daily. And it's not that I went into like anaphylaxis or started to have hives. It's not like that extreme of an allergic response. But specifically like avocados, like my skin got very, very red and inflamed off a very small percentage, or small like sample of that being administered, pricked, whatever. So it could be helpful, especially if you think that like, okay, I've exhausted all of the, potential culprits of irritants, and especially in the case of something GI that's like causing that much distension and discomfort. Like it could very well be worth looking at foods that are healthy. And okay, go through a functional specialist, sure, if you want to. It could be worth going to, someone who's within network and someone who is more so on the public side of things, just so that you have both perspectives, especially if you find that, like, on the private side, the cost is very high or the protocols are very, like, nuanced and niche. I can't tell you how many people who they've just are defeated because they've been to functional specialist, to functional specialist, to functional specialist. They spent tens of thousands of dollars. They've wasted years just trying to, go through and try these different protocols, and like oftentimes ingesting a lot of supplements that aren't really helping, are very costly, and then like their actual diet itself is not, although albeit very restrictive, is not helping them see any kind of improvement. So all that to say, um, if you're finding that you're having any kind of systemic response and you're unsure of if it's infectious, reproductive, if it is hormonally driven, or GI, or autoimmune, even like this could be something that, and specifically it's like happening at the waist or really systemically, I would seek medical help. I wouldn't just live that way. Now, The last thing that I'll talk about when we're talking about like shrinking your waist, bringing your waistline in, um, this is very specific to individuals who, maybe are going to get on stage, but I would even say like just to individuals who have poor pelvic stability, have very poor control over holding their core. And this is something in our space, like it's like the equivalent of saying like, oh, you want to grow your glutes, put all your weight in your heels. We're told like don't train your waist, like train your waist in like wearing a corset or wearing like a squeam, but don't actually train it. Don't like contract your waist because you don't want it to get too thick. Don't brace your core, like wear a belt so that you have like the appropriate amount of core bracing, which is just a very weird anecdote. But what I'll say is specifically for individuals who are going to compete, I think it's really important to have good waist control. And even for myself, like even despite what I said all at the beginning of this podcast, something I started doing this week because I want my posing to be solid. I want my front pose to be like just completely statuesque. I've been timing my ability to hold my front pose and hold my waist in. I'm doing vacuums every morning. I'm making sure that like I can actually contract that muscle and bring it in fully and then hold that. And like it's very uncomfortable. It's not necessarily time consuming. It's just not something that like, it does take a lot of repetition and takes a lot of intention with practicing, but I do recommend if you have any concerns about your waist size, and specifically for the competitor or the individual who just, like maybe you see pictures and you, like, don't think that your stomach is protruding, and it's not protruding in, like, more of an infection or like, a, uh, medical way, but, like, it's not like a bloating response, but you're just like, "Oh, I didn't know, like, that's just how I stand. I stand with an anterior pelvic tilt." And if I try to suck in, like I don't really have good abdominal control. Then that's where I think working on pelvic stability. So working on core bracing and specifically working on being able to maintain a neutral spinal position. So rib cage over the pelvis and not having that excessive anterior pelvic tilt, which we also need for competing, but specifically in the training setting, ensuring that you have that mind muscle connection and you have that ability to gauge whether or not you're maintaining a neutral pelvis. I find that to actually be really, really helpful, not just in injury prevention and loading as well, but like also then in my ability to pose. I feel like I have a better mind muscle connection to that musculature. But in terms of that lower abdomen, like, making sure that it's really tight and that it's staying in despite, posing and getting really fatigued holding that front pose while also being in a super, contracted position at the lumbar spine. Doing vacuums, I find to be really, really helpful, and if you're not familiar, this is a technique where you kinda draw your belly button towards your spine, so you suck in excessively and, like, some people would do it with rib flares, some people will suck in and then try to depress their ribs, but you're creating basically this. I don't even know if I would call it compression. Like some people would describe it like your, I don't even know if I want to describe it that way, but this can strengthen your TVA, so your transverse abdominis. I wouldn't necessarily say this in itself shrinks the tissue. God, I heard the dumbest thing ever this morning, which I'm probably gonna record on next, but um, about like shrinking like muscle fibers, like whatever. Okay, I digress. But I do think it builds awareness, and that's for me like times where I don't do vacuums regularly versus times that I do them. I'm able to see a really big difference in my posture, in my ability to hold that braced position, and like when you're doing vacuums, like I do them without breathing. So they're also like, for like free diving, they're also like forms of tables. So it's like CO2 exposure and like building that breath hold, which you don't necessarily have to do for this. That's not really the point. I know for a lot of people, they don't breathe. But in the case that like we're on stage, we kind of have to breathe. So very shallow breaths are technically okay. It's just for me a matter of like building that connection to that tissue and knowing like, okay, when I suck in really hard, I can like pull that musculature back in, so that everything is flat and smooth and I'm not having like whatever that sinkage or that lower belly like pooch. I know a lot of people wear waist trainers. I don't think that's the most effective way to train your waist. I think vacuums actually build that awareness, and I can understand how a waist trainer will cause you to be more aware throughout the day. I could see that as an argument. Um, but I mean, like, it's just like this is how I think about things. I'm like, I would rather just force myself to gauge how aware am I throughout the day and work on that consistently. So at any times if I'm like letting my lower stomach go, I'm like, okay, let me bring it in and like let me sit like somewhat half contracted. Um Waist trainers, I think, like, honestly, if I were to make an argument, like, for wearing them, it wouldn't be in training. Like, that would be, like, the only time if we're trying to build awareness around, like, just keeping your abdomen sucked in, I'd say outside of training, potentially. But again, like, I would just rather have that high integrity of, like, just pull your stomach in, just do it yourself, don't let it do it for you. Because also on that, like, with waist trainers, you can put one on and if we're talking about just, like, a Velcro spandex wrap. I mean, that's just holding you in. That's like Skims, like on steroids. But if we're talking about like a corset, okay, like that probably isn't the best idea, especially if we're talking about wearing that like for hours throughout the day. But let's say even in the case that you're wearing either one of these while you're training, it's a really hard sell for me, and I would rather have someone work on pelvic stability and building that awareness of having almost like that half vacuumed position as much as they can throughout the day, and then in their training, focusing on adequate core bracing versus them just putting this, device, this tool essentially to compress their waist. Like, the idea with, like, a belt is, like, you can brace into it and it can help assist in that core bracing, but even then, like, I don't think that's something that people need a lot of. I think they're almost using it as a crutch to compensate. All this to say, let me bring this together and try to land the plane. Shrinking your waist isn't always just eating less and moving more. And I think you can really find the value in understanding like what you're actually trying to do. If it's fat loss, if it's improving the shape, like creating something like an hourglass, if it's resolving a medical issue that you've kind of just normalized and been told that you're going to have to live with, like, absolutely fuck that. That's just no, that's not medical care. There are some things that you might have to live with, but there are ways to improve managing the symptoms. And that's where I really like want to encourage you to advocate for yourself. And if you're not getting the care that you need, find someone that can give you a fresh set of eyes. And it might be better versed on your specific situation. But core control, that is an easy one. It's low hanging fruit, and you don't have to be a professional to do it. You don't have to be a competitor. And it's something that honestly will have a ton of carryover in your training. So, if you combine all these strategies, obviously, if you don't have an actual system disorder, you don't need to seek medical help unless you're just very curious, like, hey, I don't know, maybe I am hormonally distended. Maybe that's driving some of this like visceral fat gain or water retention. Maybe that would make sense. But if you combine all of these based on your goal. And then you measure regularly and then you adjust as needed. I mean, like you can absolutely improve the aesthetics in that taper that you have at the waist and even the visual definition. So I hope this was helpful. This was a long one. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.